I planned my dad's wedding to the woman I hated for 20 years. Then, I found out the truth. The morning of my father's second wedding, I stood in the bathroom of a Marriott outside Nashville with a steamer in one hand and a stranger's wedding dress on a hanger in the other, and I thought about the exact words I was going to say if anyone asked me to give a toast. I wasn't going to say, "I'm happy for you." I wasn't going to say, "Welcome to the family." I had a whole speech loaded up in my head, sharp as a kitchen knife, about promises and second chances and the woman standing at that altar who, as far as I was concerned, had blown my parents' marriage to pieces when I was 11 years old. Her name was Renata, and I had spent 240 hours over the past 4 months building her the wedding of her dreams. If you told me a year before that I'd be the one steaming Renata Castellano's dress, color-coding her seating chart, tasting cake flavors with her at a bakery in East Nashville, I would have laughed you out of the room. But that's the thing about family. It doesn't ask you what you're comfortable with. It just hands you the job and walks away. By the time that wedding was over, I didn't just find out who my father's fiancée really was. I found out who my mother really was too, and what she'd let me believe for 20 years so that I'd never have to know the truth about the man I called Dad. Stick with me on this one because the ending is not what you think. My name's Marissa. I grew up in Franklin, Tennessee, one of those towns just south of Nashville that used to be all farmland and horse fences before it turned into a subdivision every square mile. My dad, Tom Hale, sold insurance. My mom, Diane, taught third grade at the elementary school 2 streets over from our house. On paper, we were about as boring and stable as a family could get. Sunday dinners, Little League, a minivan with a Vanderbilt sticker on the back window, even though none of us ever went there. Then, the summer I turned 11, it all came apart in about 6 weeks. I remember the night it started because it was the 4th of July, and we were watching fireworks off the Franklin Square, and my dad wasn't there. My mom kept checking her phone. She kept smiling at me like everything was fine, but her jaw was tight the whole night, and when we got home there was a fight behind their bedroom door that I could hear through the wall even with a pillow over my head. 2 weeks later, my dad moved out. Into an apartment off Mac Hatcher Parkway, one of those beige complexes with a pool nobody used. And within a month, my mom told me, carefully, gently, in the way adults think is gentle but really isn't, that Dad had been seeing someone. A woman from his office. Her name was Renata. I was 11. I didn't need the details. I just needed a villain, and my mom, without ever once saying this is her fault, gave me one anyway. Every time Renata's name came up, my mom's face would do this thing. This flinch, this closing off, and kids are smart. Kids read faces better than they read words. I learned that Renata was the reason my house wasn't a house anymore. She was the reason my dad missed my 6th grade graduation. She was the reason Christmas got split into 2 sad little half-Christmases instead of one whole one. I built an entire personality for a woman I'd never met. In my head, Renata Castellano was calculating. Homewrecker. The kind of woman who goes after married men on purpose, who doesn't care who she hurts, who smiles at family functions like she belongs there. I held on to that story for 20 years. Through my dad's awkward Saturday visits that slowly stopped happening as I got older. Through my parents' divorce being finalized when I was 12. Through my mom raising me mostly solo, working extra tutoring gigs on the side, never once bad-mouthing my dad outright but never really defending him either, just letting that silence say what it needed to say. My dad and I stayed in touch, but it was thin. Birthday calls. The occasional awkward dinner at a Cracker Barrel off I-65 when he was in town. He never brought Renata around me. Not once, not in 20 years. I used to think that was him being considerate. Later I'd understand it was something else entirely. By the time I was 31, working as an event coordinator in Nashville. Yeah, the irony's not lost on me. I plan weddings for a living. My relationship with my dad was polite but distant. A once-a-month phone call. A love you. Talk soon. That neither of us really meant with our whole chest. Then, in March, he called me on a Tuesday night, which was already weird because Tom Hale does not call on Tuesdays. Tom Hale calls on the second Sunday of the month at 6 p.m., like clockwork, like a man setting a calendar reminder for a call daughter. "Hey, kiddo," he said, and I could hear something nervous under his voice, something rehearsed. "So, Renata and I are getting married in June. And I know this is a lot. I know it's out of nowhere for you. But I know it's a huge ask, but you do this for a living and I don't trust anybody else to do it right, and I was hoping you'd help us plan it. I sat there on my couch in my East Nashville rental with the phone against my ear for what felt like a full minute of silence. 20 years of built-up resentment toward a woman I had never even met face-to-face, and my father wanted me to build her the best day of her life. I should have said no. Every rational bone in my body was screaming at me to say no. I said yes. I've asked myself 100 times since then why I said yes, and I think the real answer is this: some small, stubborn part of me wanted to finally look this woman in the eye. 20 years of being handed a villain in absentia. I wanted to meet her. I wanted to see for myself what kind of woman blows up a family and gets a happy ending out of it anyway. I had no idea that the story I'd been telling myself for 2 decades had a hole in it the size of Tennessee. We met for the first time at a coffee shop on 12 South, one of those exposed brick places with a chalkboard menu and oat milk lattes that cost more than my first car payment. My dad wanted to come, but I told him no. If I was doing this, I was doing it my way, on my terms, one-on-one, no buffer. I got there 15 minutes early to scope the place out, order my coffee, get my armor on. I had this whole image in my head of what Renata was going to look like. Polished, maybe a little too done up, the kind of woman who wears her confidence like a weapon. I was ready to hate her on sight. She walked in wearing jeans and a Titans hoodie, hair thrown up in a clip, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else in the world than sitting across from me. "Marissa," she said. Her voice shook a little. "That's me." She sat down across from me, hands wrapped around her coffee cup like she needed something to hold on to. And for about 30 seconds, neither of us said anything. "I want you to know," she finally said, "that I told your dad I didn't think this was a good idea. Asking you to plan this. I told him it was too much. But here we are," I said. "Not warm. Not cold either. Just flat. Here we are." She took a breath. "I'm not going to pretend I don't know what you think of me, Marissa. I've known for 20 years. I've had 20 years to sit with it. That threw me off my rhythm a little. I'd expected defensiveness, or overcompensating friendliness, or that syrupy fake nice thing people do when they're trying too hard. Instead, she just looked tired. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with wedding planning. "So set the record straight, then," I said. "You've got the floor." She looked down at her coffee cup for a long moment. "Your dad should be the one to tell you the whole thing. It's not really mine to tell. But I'll tell you this much. I met your father 2 years after your parents separated. Not before." I laughed. And it wasn't a nice laugh. "That's not what happened. My mom told me you two were together while he was still married. That's the whole reason." "I know what you were told," Renata said quietly. "I'm not going to fight you on it today. Not over coffee, not on the first time we've ever met. That's not fair to you, and it's not really my story to hand you, piece by piece, in a coffee shop. But I need you to know, for what it's worth, that I never set out to hurt anybody. And I loved your dad, through some stuff that almost broke him. I'm not the villain you've built me up to be. I know you don't believe that yet. I don't need you to believe it today." I didn't know what to do with that. It didn't match the story. It also didn't sound like a lie, and I'd been to enough vendor negotiations and difficult client conversations in my career to have a decent radar for people lying to my face. She wasn't lying. Or if she was better at it than anyone I'd ever met. I decided, right then, that I'd plan the wedding, keep it strictly professional, and not let myself get pulled into whatever complicated, murky history existed between these two people and my mother. I was the event coordinator. I would do my job. I would smile in the photos. And when it was over, I could go back to my quiet once-a-month phone calls and put the whole thing behind me. That plan lasted about 6 weeks. If you've never planned a wedding professionally, let me tell you, it's part logistics, part therapy session, part hostage negotiation. You end up knowing things about people, their fights, their families, the stuff that comes out sideways when someone's stressed about seating charts and stuck between 2 mothers-in-law who hate each other. Renata and I fell into a rhythm faster than I expected. She had exactly the kind of taste I could work with. She wanted something at the Bell Tower or one of those restored old buildings downtown with exposed brick and string lights. Nothing fussy. Nothing over the top. She kept saying things like, I just wanted to feel like us. And every time she said us, I'd feel this little twist in my gut because us included my father, and my father used to be part of an us that included my mother and me. But the professional in me took over. I booked a venue on 2nd Avenue with wrought iron balconies and exposed brick. I lined up a caterer who did a killer smoked brisket and hot chicken sliders. Very Nashville, very them. We did cake tastings at a bakery on Charlotte Avenue where Renata cried a little over a lemon lavender cake because it reminded her of her own mother, who'd passed a few years back. That was the first crack in my armor. Watching her cry over cake because it reminded her of her dead mom. Villains in my head didn't cry over cake. Villains didn't have moms they missed. Over those weeks, I started noticing things. Small things. The way she talked about my dad. Not in that gushy, performative way some couples do in front of family, but like she actually knew him. Like she knew the little stuff. That he couldn't sleep without a fan running. That he still, after all these years, got nervous before doctor's appointments because of something that happened when he was a kid. That he'd stopped drinking 11 years ago and hadn't touched a drop since. That last one stopped me cold. My dad had a drinking problem? Nobody had ever told me that. Not my mom. Not him. Wait, I said, one afternoon while we were going through floral arrangements at a shop in Berry Hill. Dad had a drinking problem? Renata's face went through about 4 different expressions in 2 seconds. Surprise, then something like caution, then regret. Like she'd said something she wasn't supposed to say. You didn't know that, she said. It wasn't a question. No. I did not know that. She set down the sample of ranunculus she was holding. I think that's a conversation you need to have with your dad, Marissa. I really do. I've already said more than I should have. Renata. I put my hand flat on the table between us. I have spent 20 years thinking you were the reason my family fell apart. If there's something else going on here, I think I deserve to know. She looked at me for a long moment, weighing something. Then she shook her head. It's not mine to tell you. I'm sorry. But I promise you, ask your dad. Ask him about the years before I ever met him. Not the years everyone told you about. The years before. I left that flower shop with my head spinning, a bouquet of unanswered questions instead of ranunculus, and a gut feeling that the story I'd built my whole adult identity around had a hole in it big enough to drive a truck through. I called my dad that night. Not on the second Sunday of the month. On a random Thursday at 9 p.m., which I'm pretty sure gave him a small heart attack because he picked up on the first ring sounding panicked. Marissa? Everything okay? I need to ask you something, and I need you to actually answer me. Not the polished version. The real one. There was a long pause on the other end. Renata told you, he said. Not a question either. She told me almost nothing, actually. She told me you had a drinking problem, and then she clammed up and told me to ask you. So, I'm asking you. I heard him exhale, long and slow, the kind of exhale that comes from a place a person's been carrying something for a very, very long time. Sit down, he said. This is going to take a minute. And then my father told me the truth about my parents' marriage. The real one. Not the 20-year-old fairy tale with a clean villain that I'd been handed as an 11-year-old and never questioned since. He told me that in the years before the divorce, starting back when I was maybe 7 or 8, he developed a real, serious drinking problem. Not the movie kind. Not falling down drunk in public kind. The quiet kind. The kind that happens behind a closed garage door with a cooler of beer while he told my mom he was working on the truck. The kind that turns a person into someone who's present in the room, but absent everywhere that matters. He told me my mom had begged him for years to get help. That there'd been fights I never heard because they were careful, so careful about keeping it from me. That things had gotten bad enough, more than once, that my mom had taken me to my grandmother's house for a few nights for a little trip, which I'd always remembered as fun, not as an escape. And he told me that by the time the divorce actually happened, the marriage had already been dead for 2, maybe 3 years. That the divorce wasn't caused by an affair. It was caused by years of him choosing a bottle over his family and my mother finally, exhaustedly, running out of road. So, Where does Renata come in? I asked, my voice tight. Renata worked with me for about a year before your mom and I split, he said. We were friendly. Co-workers. Nothing more, I promise you that, Marissa. I swear on your life, nothing happened between us while I was married. But here's the thing. He paused. After the divorce, I hit bottom. Hard. Like, scary hard. And it was Renata, a co-worker, someone who barely knew me outside the office, who noticed I wasn't okay. Who showed up at my apartment one night when I hadn't answered anybody's calls in 4 days. Who found me in a state I'm not proud of. And she's the one who got me into a program. She drove me to my first AA meeting. She sat in the parking lot for 2 hours because I was too scared to walk in alone. My throat went tight. She saved my life, kiddo. Not romantically, not at first. That came later, almost 2 years after your mom and I were already divorced. But she's the reason I'm sitting here, sober for 11 years, able to be your father at all. And your mom, he stopped. What about mom? Your mom knows all of this, Marissa. She knows the truth. She's known it the whole time. I want you to sit with that for a second because I had to. 20 years. 20 years of birthday cakes and school plays and every single conversation where Renata's name came up like a curse word under my mother's breath. Every single one of those moments, my mother knew exactly who Renata was. Knew she wasn't the cause of the divorce. Knew she was, if anything, the reason my father survived long enough to still be in my life at all. And she let me build a villain out of a woman who had nothing to do with it.
I didn't sleep that night.
I sat on my back porch with a glass of wine I didn't drink, and I went through 20 years of memories with new eyes. Every flinch on my mom's face when Renata's name came up, I'd read it as pain from betrayal. Now, I wondered if it was something else. Guilt, maybe. Or fear. Fear that if the truth ever came out, I'd stop seeing her as the wronged party and start asking harder questions about what irreconcilable differences had actually meant in our house. I had one wedding to plan for weeks out for a woman I'd spent 2 decades hating for a crime she didn't commit. And I had a mother I needed to confront about a lie that had shaped the entire architecture of how I understood my own family. I drove out to my mom's house in Franklin 2 days later. Same house I grew up in, she'd never left it even after I moved out, even after it got too big for one person. There's a porch swing out front that's been there since I was in middle school, and she was sitting on it when I pulled up like she somehow already knew this conversation was coming. Maybe she did. Maybe my dad had called her to give her a heads up. Or maybe a mother just knows when her kid is about to ask her the question she's been dreading for 20 years. You look upset, she said, as I walked up the porch steps.
I talked to Dad, I said.
About the drinking. About Renata. About what actually happened. I watched something in her face fall. Not surprise. She wasn't surprised. Just this heavy, exhausted acceptance, like a person putting down something they'd been carrying for so long their arms had gone numb to the weight of it. Sit down, she said, and patted the swing next to her. The exact same words my dad had used 2 nights before, like they'd both been rehearsing this handoff for 2 decades without ever discussing it. Why? I said, not sitting, standing over her instead, arms crossed. Did you let me hate her for 20 years, Mom? Why did you let me build my whole idea of my family around a lie? My mom's eyes filled up, but she didn't look away from me. I never told you it was Renata's fault, Marissa. I want you to remember that. I never once said her name and called her a homewrecker. I never told you a single lie.
You didn't have to say it.
You let me believe it. That's just as bad. You're right, she said, and her voice cracked on the word. You're right, and I've known for years I was going to have to answer for that eventually. I just kept hoping I wouldn't have to. Why, Mom? Just why? She was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the yard, at the maple tree my dad had planted the year I was born, before he moved out and stopped being the kind of dad who planted trees. Because I was so angry, she finally said, and so humiliated and so scared that I didn't know how to explain the real story to an 11-year-old. How do you tell your kid, your father chose drinking over us, over and over, for years, and I finally had to leave him to protect you? How do you say that to a little girl who worshipped her dad? I didn't have the words for it. And then, when you started asking questions and Renata's name came up because your father started seeing her, it was just easier. It was easier to let you be angry at another woman than to be angry at your own father. Anger needs somewhere to go, Marissa. I gave yours a place to land that wasn't him. Because I was terrified that if you knew the truth, the real truth, that your dad had a disease and it nearly cost him everything, including you'd either blame him forever, or worse, you'd blame me for leaving him. That's not your call to make, I said, my voice shaking now too. That was never your call to make, Mom. You took 20 years of my life, and you decided what I was allowed to know about my own family. I know. Tears were running down her face now, unchecked. I know, baby. I've known it was wrong for a long time. I just didn't know how to undo it once it had already calcified into the truth you'd built your whole childhood on top of. I was scared that if I told you, you'd feel like your whole childhood was a lie. It kind of is, I said. It kind of is a lie, Mom. We sat there. Well, I stood, she sat in silence for a long time. The kind of silence that isn't empty, it's just full of things too big to say out loud yet. I'm not asking you to forgive me today, she said eventually. I'm not even sure I'd forgive me, if I were you. But I need you to know something else, too. Your father wasn't the only one who had things to be ashamed of in that marriage. I wasn't perfect either. I made choices in how I handled all of it that I'm not proud of, including this one, including protecting you from the truth in a way that ended up hurting you more in the long run. But Marissa, I never lied to protect myself. I lied because I loved you so much I couldn't stand the thought of you carrying the real weight of what happened. I just didn't realize I was making you carry a different, heavier weight instead. A wrong one. I left my mom's porch that afternoon without a clean resolution. No hug, no I forgive you, no movie-perfect ending. Just an ache in my chest and 4 weeks left until I had to stand in a room and help the woman I'd falsely blamed for 20 years marry my father, in front of everyone we both knew. Here's the thing about grief nobody tells you. And yeah, this was a kind of grief. Mourning the story I thought was true. Mourning the version of my childhood I thought I understood. Grief doesn't stop the world around you just because you need a minute. Vendors still needed confirmations. The caterer needed a final head count. My father called twice a week now instead of once a month, tentative, gentle, like he was trying to figure out how much space to give me and how much to close. I threw myself into the wedding logistics because it gave me somewhere to put my hands while my head was still catching up. And somewhere in those 4 weeks, something shifted between Renata and me. I stopped seeing her as a suspect. I started actually seeing her. We had a dress fitting at a bridal shop in Green Hills, and while the seamstress was pinning the hem, Renata caught my eye in the mirror. "Your mom talked to you?" she asked quietly.
Yeah.
"You okay?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. This woman, who I'd hated in absentia for 2 decades, was the one checking in on my emotional well-being while wearing her own wedding dress. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "I think I owe you an apology, though. A real one. Not a wedding planner professional one." She turned around carefully, mindful of the pin still in the hem, and looked at me. "You don't owe me anything, Marissa. You were a kid who got handed a story. That's not on you. That was never on you. I said some things about you growing up. Not to you, obviously, I never met you, but in my head out loud sometimes to friends. I built you into somebody you're not." "I know," she said simply. "I've always known, honestly. Your dad used to tell me, back when we first got serious, that you probably hated me and didn't even know why. It hurt. I won't pretend it didn't. But I also understood it. Kids need somewhere to put their pain. I happened to be standing there when yours needed somewhere to go." "That's a really generous way to look at it." "I've had a lot of years to get there," she said, with a small, tired smile. That night, for the first time in the whole process, I let myself really imagine what the wedding day was going to feel like, not as an event coordinator building somebody else's timeline, but as a daughter, watching her father marry a woman who, it turned out, had quietly held his life together with both hands during the years I wasn't around to see it happen. I started, slowly, to understand that I wasn't just planning a wedding. I was going to be there for the ending of a story that had actually started with somebody saving my father's life. And I'd spent 20 years hating the hero of that story because nobody had ever told me it was a rescue, not a robbery. The rehearsal dinner was at a restaurant in the Gulch, all exposed pipes and Edison bulbs, the kind of place that charges $19 for a burger and somehow makes you feel like it's worth it. My mom wasn't there. That would have been a bridge too far for everyone, and nobody expected her to be. But my dad's brother, my Uncle Rick, made the trip up from Chattanooga, along with a handful of Renata's family. Her sister, Bea, who lived in Memphis and had the same tired-eyed kindness as Renata, and a cousin named Marcus who kept doing an absolutely terrible Elvis impression every time somebody mentioned Memphis, which, this being Tennessee, was often. My dad stood up to give a toast, and his hands were shaking a little around his glass of sparkling cider. He doesn't drink, obviously, hasn't in 11 years, and everybody at that table quietly ordered the same to make it easier on him, which told me something about the kind of family Renata had built around him without me even noticing. "I'm not a guy who's good with speeches," he started, and everybody laughed a little because it was true. My dad's idea of eloquence is a well-timed dad joke about grills. But I want to say something real, just for a second. 11 years ago, I was a man who'd lost basically everything that mattered to me because of choices I made. My marriage, most of my relationship with my daughter for a while there, my own self-respect, if I'm being honest. And there was exactly one person who looked at the absolute worst version of me and decided I was still worth showing up for. He looked at Renata, and his voice cracked. "You didn't fall in love with the guy who had his life together, Renata. You fell in love with a guy who was still climbing out of a hole he dug himself. And you never once made me feel like that made me less worth loving. I don't know how I got that lucky. I really don't." Then he looked at me, and I felt my whole chest tighten. "And Marissa, kiddo, I know this last month has been a lot. I know some truths came out that should have come out a long time ago, and that's on me and on your mom, and honestly on both of us for thinking we were protecting you by keeping you in the dark. But I need you to know something. You planning this wedding, spending your nights and weekends putting this whole thing together for two people who put you through a lot without ever explaining why, that's about the most generous thing anybody's ever done for me. I don't take it for granted. Not for one single second." I had to excuse myself to the bathroom after that because I was not about to cry in front of Marcus mid-Elvis impression. Renata found me a few minutes later, leaning against the sink, dabbing at my mascara with a paper towel. "You okay?" she asked for the second time that month. "I keep thinking," I said, "about all the years I could have had a relationship with you. If somebody had just told me the truth from the start. All the birthdays, all the holidays, where you were probably standing on the other side of some door because nobody wanted to deal with how I'd react. There's no version of this where I let myself be bitter about lost time," Renata said, handing me a fresh paper towel. "Because the honest truth is, Marissa, I got the version of your dad that was already fighting his way back. I never had to compete with the man he used to be. I just got to help build the man he's become. And now I get to know you too. Late is still on time, as far as I'm concerned." "That's annoyingly wise for a rehearsal dinner bathroom," I said, laughing wetly. "I've had a lot of practice being patient," she said. 20 years worth. The morning of the wedding, I was up at 6, running my checklist like it was a military operation. Flowers arriving at 8, caterer set up at 9:30, hair and makeup team in the bridal suite by 10. 2nd Avenue looked gorgeous in the early light, all that old brick catching the sun. String lights waiting to be switched on for the evening reception. My mom wasn't coming, obviously, but she called me that morning. "I know today's going to be hard and complicated and a lot of things at once," she said. "I just wanted you to know I'm proud of you for doing this, even after everything." "Thanks, Mom," I said, and I meant it, even though there were still cracks between us that hadn't finished healing and probably wouldn't for a long time. "And Marissa, for what it's worth, Renata's a good person. I've known that for years, even when I let you believe otherwise. I want you to enjoy today. Really enjoy it. Don't let my mistakes take that away from you too." I spent that afternoon doing what I do best, running timelines, calming down a nervous flower girl, fixing a boutonniere that kept falling apart, redirecting Marcus away from the open bar he assumed existed. It did not. My dad had specifically requested a dry reception, and every single vendor had been briefed accordingly. Renata got ready in the bridal suite upstairs, and around 4:30, I went up to check on her before the ceremony. She was standing in front of the mirror in her dress. Simple, ivory, a little bit of lace at the sleeves, Nothing over the top, exactly her, and when she saw me in the doorway, she smiled. "You did an incredible job," she said. "All of this. I don't think I've said that enough." "You look beautiful," I said, and I meant it without any of the old bitterness attached to the sentence. "Will you do something for me?" she asked. "I know it's not traditional, but I don't have my mom here anymore, and my sister's already got her hands full wrangling Marcus. Would you walk me down partway? Not the whole aisle. That's for your dad to do with me at the end, obviously, but from the suite to the top of the stairs. I don't want to do that part alone." I don't think I've ever said yes to anything faster in my life. The ceremony itself was small and simple, out on the rooftop terrace of a venue, string lights just starting to glow as the sun dipped low over the Cumberland River. My dad cried the second Renata appeared at the top of the aisle, full on, unashamed, tears streaming down his face in front of 40 guests, and nobody laughed at him for it, because everybody there knew at least a piece of what those two people had walked through to get to that rooftop. I sat in the second row, and for the first time in 20 years, when I looked at Renata Castellano, I didn't see a villain from somebody else's story. I saw the person who'd sat in a parking lot for 2 hours so my father wouldn't have to walk into his first AA meeting alone. I hadn't planned on giving a toast. That sharp, bitter speech I'd rehearsed in my head months earlier, the one about promises and second chances delivered with a knife's edge, I'd let that one go somewhere around the rehearsal dinner bathroom. But when the DJ opened the floor for a few words during the reception, my dad caught my eye from across the room, and I found myself standing up before I'd fully decided to. I picked up a microphone with hands that were shaking almost as much as my dad's had the night before. Most of you know me as the person who's been running around all day fixing boutonnieres and yelling at the caterer about the brisket timing. I started and got a decent laugh, which helped steady me. What most of you don't know is that 4 months ago, when my dad asked me to plan this wedding, I said yes, while privately planning to hate every second of it. More laughter, a little more nervous this time because people could tell something real was coming. I grew up believing a story about my family that turned out to be not exactly wrong, but incomplete in the most important way. I believed Renata was the reason my parents' marriage ended. I held on to that for 20 years, without ever giving her a chance to be anything other than the villain I'd built in my head as a scared 11-year-old. What I found out this year is that Renata isn't the reason my family fell apart. She's the reason my dad is standing here at all. She showed up for him during the worst chapter of his life, when nobody, including me, including my mom, including maybe even himself, believed there'd be a next chapter worth showing up for. I looked over at my dad, whose face had gone completely open in a way I don't think I'd seen since I was a little girl. "Dad, I'm sorry it took me this long to understand what you went through, and I'm sorry I spent so many years being cold toward the woman who helped save your life. Renata, I know I can't get back the 20 years where I could have known you as something other than a name I wasn't supposed to say too kindly, but I'd like to spend the next 20 getting to know you as what you actually are, which, from everything I've seen this year, is somebody who loves my father exactly as hard as he needs to be loved, on his best days and his hardest ones." I raised my glass, and my hand wasn't shaking anymore. To second chances. To the whole truth, even when it's 20 years late. And to Mr. and Mrs. Hale. The room erupted, and my dad crossed the entire reception floor to pull me into a hug, so tight I nearly dropped the microphone, and over his shoulder I watched Renata wipe tears off her face with the back of her hand, laughing and crying at the same time, and I thought, this is not the ending I thought I was signing up for 4 months ago. It's a better one. It's been 8 months since that wedding, and I want to be honest with you because these stories always want to wrap up neat, and real life almost never does. My mom and I are still working through it. We talk every week. We've had 2 long, hard conversations since the wedding, and we're slowly rebuilding trust on a foundation that has to be honest instead of protective. It's not fixed. I don't think fixed is even the right word for what we're doing. We're rebuilding, which is slower and messier, but it's real. My dad and I talk every week now instead of once a month. Real conversations, not just weather and work check-ins. He's 15 years sober this year, the 11 he told me about plus the years since, and yes, I do the math slightly wrong sometimes because I'm still catching up on a decade of information I didn't have before. He took me to an open AA meeting a few months back, not to participate, just to sit in the back and listen because he wanted me to understand what that part of his life actually looked like instead of imagining it. It was one of the most eye-opening afternoons of my adult life. Renata and I get lunch about twice a month now, just the two of us, at a taco place in East Nashville that neither of us would have guessed the other liked. She's teaching me her mom's lemon lavender cake recipe, the one she cried over during the tasting all those months ago. Last month, she texted me a photo of a Halloween costume idea for next year if you're around, casually, like she's already planning for a future where I'm just there. A regular part of things. Not a guest star in her life. A fixture. I think about that villain I built when I was 11 years old sometimes. How real she felt to me. How completely I believed in her. For 20 years, without ever once questioning the story I'd been handed. And I think about how the truth, the actual, complicated, unflattering, human truth, was so much harder to sit with than the simple story I'd been given. But it was also so much more worth knowing. If there's a lesson in all of this, and honestly, I go back and forth on whether stories like mine need a lesson, or whether they're just what they are, messy and human and ongoing, I think it's this: the people we decide to hate, sometimes we decide it before we ever really know them. We take the story we're handed, especially as kids, and we build a whole person on top of it, and then we spend years defending a version of reality that was never actually true to begin with. I spent 20 years hating the woman who helped save my father's life. I'm spending the rest of my life getting to know her instead. If this story hit you somewhere, if it made you think about a relationship in your own life where you might be holding on to half a story instead of the whole one, I'd love to hear about it. Drop a comment and let me know. And if you want more stories like this one, hit subscribe because trust me, this family's got a few more chapters worth telling.